Who's your bear? That's right. I am your bear.
I'm Damon.
I don't brew the tea, I just serve it.
And that makes me Gary.
Don't hurt nobody with your bad self.
Can we get kinky tonight? I got so many things on my mind.
We'll see how that goes.
We've done it before.
Hi there. Happy to be here.
So last month, Tony, when you were here, we were going to talk about this, but instead, Miss Corona, uninvited COVID-19 decided to take over. So we talked about that. And this time,
Oh God.
And I don't know. Cricket
and shitty dad joke. So as I was about to say, what better...
Ooh.
Sorry, I got something in my throat. And no, there is not a he that has a name. It's called social distancing.
You're just verklempt. That's all. It's a touchy topic for you.
Well, I mean, this is kind of the way I look at it. What better day of the year to have someone on to talk about kink than the day in which, where some people are celebrating the return of somebody after they had been beaten, Yeah. Yeah.
Wah, wah.
So
Especially the topic with eggs.
that's a whole, yeah. So
You missed
we're going to
something.
probably have a little series for those of you that haven't figured out already, because this episode's called Part 1. So it's a kink show. And we thought, who is one of the kinkiest motherfuckers we know? We decided to reach out and ask Tony, a.k.a. Cubziz, to join us and have a conversation about gear. Something near and dear to his bullocks. I thought you'd like that one, David.
I'm waiting for him to do the spit take.
Oh, I do it to him all the time. Half the time it's intentional. Half the time it isn't. It's usually when he's got a Coke and he's about to take a sip. So, I thought we would talk about what gear is, the different kinds. Eventually we'll get into how you obtain some. I think there's a breadth of information that people may not be aware of. And I think most individuals, when they think about kink, and especially when they think about gear, and I'm using air quotes, they get intimidated. Because I think people think that individuals who have gear take it seriously. And that creates a barrier unintentionally in a way, because they're I don't want to buy the wrong thing or, make poor decisions. And as we were discussing in the pre-show, some gear is hella costly. So, I think it depends on how serious you want to be as to what your commitment will be. Mm-hmm. Ooh.
Oh, definitely. There's definitely a difference. It also depends on the purpose behind it.
Okay.
So,
well, let's get into some terminology, shall we?
Okay.
Yes.
Come
on, Tony.
Professor.
I'll just go ahead and start. How's that? Now, one of the things that for gear, you have to realize that gear actually can span a whole stretch of things. So even topics like leather, uniforms, like military, police, all that type of stuff. Technically, that's gear. Again, depends on your usage for it. You may not be in it thinking, oh, this is gear. This is instead something I'm wearing. That's kind of what you have to determine as you're getting into it. As you were mentioning, Gary, with the fear of getting into it, a lot of times there are groups who are very strict and they want you to have a perfect uniform, etc. But compare it to like car collecting. If you could go out and have a car and it can be perfectly mint condition, and yeah, you'll win awards for it, cool, but most people aren't going to get in at that level. They're just going to get started. However, you go to those collectors and they are more than happy to share their passion with new people, because it's somebody else to share their joy and interests.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's nice, is that gear is, like, especially like sports gear, is starting to become more popular now. A good example of that is just look at all the different fetish clothing lines that now sell singlets. 10 years ago, you wouldn't have seen it.
That brings up an interesting point. Yeah, I'll bring it up now because then we'll continue on. I find it interesting, like, especially in terms of gear, that things get co-opted, and that's probably not the right terminology, but like it exists in a certain realm and then it gets adopted, or like it kind of crosses a line from I don't want to say normal, from a standard conventional use to, I guess, kink or fetish use, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, just think of like just the drop strap. The simple, the jock strap, a jock strap.
Oh, I thought you said the drop back, and I was like, "What the fuck is that?" I was like,
"That's a whole new type of
union suit." Like what? Huh?
No, like the jock strap. Like, I mean, I'll be blunt and honest. I didn't really think about jock straps when I was in school and doing sports and stuff. Well, I never really did sports, but I don't think of that concept. When I first think of a jock strap, I think of like sexy guys wearing jock straps, like kinky things being done in jock straps. Like that is where my mind almost always goes to. Go ahead, Tony.
I was going to say, however,
I know
you probably were lusting after the coach in high school who wore jocks, knowing full well that it was enhancing his bulge, etc. And he knew, but you didn't know it at the time.
Maybe. No. Actually, I didn't like our coaches.
Well, okay.
But that's because their personalities, not necessarily them and what they were wearing.
Well, see, that was where I was like pausing, because that I was like in a conundrum, because I was like, I didn't like some of our phys ed teachers, the males, because of their personalities. But then again, the one from elementary school was built like a Thor, for lack of a better reference. He was like this blonde, like hairy god that had descended from wherever. No, well, no, not that I got a problem with that. Yeah. So, yeah, I didn't, but I didn't think about the fact that like that the ones in high school were, wearing jocks, but now it makes more sense, sort of, because I was kind of like, what's with that business?
Oh yeah,
like, but I had nobody to talk to because I wasn't out. I couldn't say to anybody. Like,
look at that dick. Look at that ball.
Like, really? Badunk? Like, it's just kind of on display.
It was a while ago, and that was it was a subtle way to be out in public and sporting your things.
Well, I mean, and that is a fantasy, thing. As I was just recently discussing with someone who has been on the show in the past, but I respect their privacy. We were discussing about the line of fantasy versus reality, and how domination, like, there's a whole consent thing, but in fantasy, especially in terms of entertainment, what's put out there, that isn't a part of it. Like, we bypass that or skip it or act like it doesn't exist. So you end up with these kind of like DS modeled fantasy things of like the coach and the student and the locker room or the shower, or you know what I mean? And like it's great. Like it can be fun to fap to, even potentially role play, but you know, the reality of it is far more complex.
Oh yeah. Well, and if for example, most people that are interested in gear, it comes from some past experience with it. So if you were in high school and lusted after a football player, you're probably still having an interest in football gear. You may not express it, but you might have that interest still of, hey, that would turn me on if this person showed up in gear.
Oh, I see what you mean. Because I was about to say, no, I just still like football players. Like I don't care about the gear, but
Well,
I get what you mean.
yeah.
Like,
yeah. Well, it depends on your exposure too. Like, for example, I know some people want that. They want that opposing team. So that's what it makes them interested in it. So that role play of like enemy seducing them, whatever. Sometimes it is about power. It is a power exchange where the coach is seducing the student, or vice versa, where the varsity wrestler is seducing the coach.
Yeah.
you know,
I think
that's
we've
what
all had
anyways.
that.
This is going to be an awkward show for me. Anyways, just going to own it. Well,
The
because
memories are flooding back.
I have very specific compartmentalized filed away fantasies, apparently, now that I'm like recalling and remembering certain things. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, and it also is varied. For example, I never played football. When I was in high school, I didn't have the body for it. I was the basketball skinny guy. Now I know it sounds weird, but I was.
Wow. Okay. It's okay.
Huh.
And then I wished that I was football linebacker sized, and then I went right past that. So I still find that very, very hot. At the same time, give me a skinny wrestler, and I'm all for it too. So it's not particularly a body type, but more just the sports gear for me is interesting. And when you reach into like uniforms, for example, you can get into things like police uniforms. There, you're definitely talking authority. You're talking a power of some sort. But I can guarantee you, they don't find it interesting at all. For them, it's not arousing.
Yeah.
Because that's what they wear for work. It's the last thing you want to do.
Right. And that's, you know, I imagine that's a challenge. Like, people think of uniforms or clothing attire like tied to specific occupations as like fun, sexy. I will completely admit one of my downfalls is people who work in the medical field that wear scrubs. There is something specific. I think it's about ease of access. I don't know. There's a couple of doctors.
Want some scrubs.
There's a couple of doctors on Twitter that I follow that don't help my issue. Like, it's not really an issue. It's my thing. I'm just like, you know, they're like, I need to go take a nap. Like, one of them legitimately like went to their like space on their like facility property, said they had to take a nap, and they're like, I can't sleep in my scrubs, and probably got naked, like posted pictures of it. I was like, okay.
And no, you were like, I got to go talk to that person. I'll be right back.
I want them to be my doc now, or anesthesiologist, or nurse, or whatever.
See, anesthesiologist wouldn't be fun because they just knock you out and you wouldn't remember it.
Not if they're a good one.
Anyway.
Too many thoughts. Too many thoughts.
Yes, there is such a thing as knockout play. I'm much more interested in
Too
the
many thoughts.
probably, I guess you'd be paralyzed. But that's a whole other level of.
Okay. All right.
That's it.
We're
As
killing
Alton would
David.
say, that's a different episode.
That's a different episode.
Ooh. Speaking of which,
And I have someone
sidebar.
that might be-
Or I was just gonna say, do either of you know somebody that could discuss that like topic?
Probably for sure. I probably have someone that could definitely do that.
I was gonna say I've done it. I've been the victim. So
Of Knockout?
yes.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
Like, I'm interested in Knockout, but I'm also interested if there's the kind of in between.
Well, that's what
Like
happened to
the
me.
paralyzed.
It was supposed to be
Oh.
knockout, and I was awake the whole time.
Ooh.
And so I woke up, and they didn't think I was awake, and so I had to start describing what was going on. And then it was, okay, shut up, you're ruining my fantasy.
Okay. Another show. Let's get back on track.
By the way, Lloyd in the live chat says my body is ready for gear conversations. So
Here we go.
a fan. So and back to this awesome document that of information that you put together, Tony. So you were basically saying like uniforms, items of leather, rubber, basically clothing items can be, in some fashion considered gear.
Yeah, and like a good example for that is the under the category of rubber, you have scuba gear, where most scuba divers aren't thinking, "Ooh, wow, how sexy" when they slide into it, but somebody else looking at them may be, "Ooh, I like this. I want to do this."
Yeah, there's something kind of like you mentioned in the doc, the part about accentuating body parts and body, curves and such. The wetsuit is kind of usually meant to be like mostly kind of skin tight and close to the skin. And it could, depending on the body shape, can very much accentuate and hit on certain parts that make them look firmer. I'll use the word firmer. I like the word firmer.
I'll just say one sentence: football linebacker ass.
See, I was busy thinking about visible penis line.
Yeah,
I mean that too.
Like that's, I think, the one thing that kind of draws most MSM. Yeah, is whether it be sweatpants, basketball style, like sports shorts, biking shorts, like runner shorts. Like a lot of that stuff that you wear like mid torso to mid thigh, if it has some conformity to it, I guess, and depending on the substance of the material.
Yeah.
And not only accentuating, but sometimes over accentuating. So like your catcher with a cup on, for example. You may not be interested in knowing exactly what his shape is, but the implication could be that it's there. Or the tight pants might show off the ass a lot better.
Or as YouTube recently taught me, apparently cod pieces back in the day were intentionally meant to show, like, imitate an erect penis, which I'm like, why was this missing from my history books? I would have paid attention and remembered that. Well, that's just it. Could you? I don't know many high schools across the U.S. nation that would be that authentic. Because oh my God, it's a phallus.
Well, and that's one of the things. What is you talk about the U.S. We have the hang up. It's not necessarily the world that does.
Sure.
So a lot of those cod piece. There's actually a codpiece museum, if I remember right, and I do believe it's over in Europe. You would never see that here because, oh my gosh. Yeah.
That's kind
of. What's actually. Right.
In this room. Fuck.
But that's the reality, though, that I guess the hypocrisy, there we go, of our country is like Pornhub has even proven that statistically the most frequent users, like, by geography, are in the most like ideologically repressive zones of our geography, of our country. Like, it's crazy. And I'm like, so I don't think it's that we're that Puritan. We say that because we don't know how else to phrase it. I think it's just the way we're structured. You know what I mean? In terms of like law and those type of things that, like, people think of, but I'm like, there'd be all sorts of people getting their freak on all over the place to many different things.
True.
And they, are just probably not quite open about it.
Definitely. I mean, even within our own community, there's folks who, let's just take the Tumblr effect of scroll. Oh God, I don't want to even see that. And then 5 posts later, let me go back and look at that again.
Well, but there's a lot of things you can put that to. And, human curiosity is one of them. Exposure, relevance, becomes a thing after a while. I will admit, when I was the younger kid, when I was the baby gay, all of this about kink and BDSM, I was like, you cray. Like, no, like not interested, couldn't relate to it, had no comprehension, acceptance that, or I had a disbelief that people would actually commit themselves to being in DS relationships or role play. Like my brain broke. Like I couldn't understand it because it wasn't a part of my past and it wasn't anything I had been exposed to. But over decades of being around leather folk and different entities and organizations, us doing the podcast, like I've learned quite a bit. And I'm like, all right, like you do you, boo. Like some of it's not my thing. Some of it, like my biggest thing is I've realized is that I'm a voyeur. Have been lifelong since puberty kind of hit. I was like always secretively enjoyed the like remotely kind of watching or seeing things. So like fantasy has always been for me about like observation. So like one of the biggest things I think about is like seeing neighbors or people not knowing that you can see them. Doing stuff like that's why I think erotica can have such a power for people if it's written in third person or in a way that like it's not putting you in the story, you're actually observing. So I think that people kind of find their way, and I am very much cognizant of the blessings that I've had that people have said and allowed me to be in space when other people are doing things and I get to observe stuff without being involved. And I'm perfectly fine with that. And I don't know how much of a niche that is within like BDSM kink. So I'm kind of asking the two of you, Tony and Damon, like if you know that that's a thing or if it's very like kind of specific based on the people that are participating. Do you know what I mean? Like if there's like if that happens often that space is held for people who like to observe and not be involved.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No. I think it's kind of a voyeuristic. I mean, a voyeuristic approach to a lot of things is possible. Dungeon spaces essentially in some ways can be extremely voyeuristic. You can just watch and observe. You can just see what people are doing and getting into. Now, if you're looking for more sexual things, it would depend on the space. But like one of the things I enjoyed when one of my first years at Claw was I actually went to the dungeon space. I didn't do anything. I just like stood there and watched other people basically honing their craft, as it were, and it was a very alluring experience for me because seeing people like, especially like the ones that were really like into it and their scene was like they didn't really care about anything else that was going on around them. I mean, to a point. But for the most part, they were in their scene. They were in their moment. And they were, because you're in a very public-ish dungeon space, showing off. And they wanted people to see what they're doing. But at the same time, they probably were engrossed in what they were doing to the point where it didn't really matter if someone was watching or not, if that makes sense. Oh.
What?
They have pills for that.
Oh, God. Anywho.
Okay.
Well, I'll second that of a lot of the play spaces, etc. So like when I do camp, for example, a lot of the scenes are public intentionally, both as a, hey, you might be interested in this, so here's something that you may not have ever seen before. Figure out if you like this or not, or if there's certain aspects of it that you like. You can learn from whatever's going on. You can usually wait till afterwards and start asking questions. Some of the participants, the people who are doing things, will invite people to come up and join. It depends on the situation, etc. But a lot of it is, it goes back to that whole, if I enjoy something, I want to share it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it may not even be a sexual thing. It could just be I want other people to see this.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll ask you a question. So since you're saying that you were voyeuristic, etc., so you walking into the locker room with two wrestlers who are making out, would that be an interest, like, over just the wrestling uniform itself?
You mean like if it was just two people and they weren't in wrestling uniforms?
No, just like they were in full wrestling, like they had been on the wrestling mat wrestling and suddenly broke out into other grappling.
Right.
And you walked in and got to watch.
Right.
Would that be more interesting than just somebody in a wrestling singlet?
Yes, but my caveat is, which is like, I'm going to be honest about it. It depends on what they look like. Like,
okay.
if they look like two 15-year-old junior high, low weight wrestlers, I'm not going to be interested. Like,
but so you're talking like heavyweight classes, like higher weight classes, maybe.
Right. Like, as
college
an example, at a local university, I don't know if he's still working there or not. At a local university, an Olympic gold medal wrestling individual has been a coach, and he is a beast of a man, and usually has like a Dick Butkus kind of like stash and short hair. Right. See, David's giving the thumbs up, and I'm like that man. If he was one of them, that's enough. Like, I could probably ignore the other person if they weren't my cup of tea. Like,
there you go.
Say.
Well, and the reason why I was saying that is because it kind of, that each person has to figure out what they like from different gear.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're interested in, like you were saying, with visualizing it, being able to voyeuristically see it, the gear may not be your intention. It may be the ends to the means.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I think it plays a role as part of the scene, like whatever that may be.
But it doesn't matter if you're in the gear, is what I'm saying.
No. Like that. I have always been short, fat, round. So when it comes to athletic stuff, no. Like, sorry, not my thing. I was a band geek. So, like, it doesn't, I never was in any gear. Do you know what I mean? Like, the only thing I ever had to do was, like, wear t-shirt and shorts for
gym.
And even then, like, the school that I went to, when you went into senior high for your 4 years, 9 through 12, they did a rotating focus for phys ed. So, like, one semester you did nothing but volleyball, another semester you did nothing but, like, archery, or like there was all these different things that we kind of rotated through, and we had to do one whole semester as wrestling. And I was freaked the fuck out because while we didn't have to have singlets, it was highly endorsed that all the guys should wear jock straps, which I never even bothered to tell my parents about, because I was like, I'm not buying a jock strap. Like, no. And it wasn't that I was against it. I was just like, one, I didn't really see the point of it. And two, I was like, that's another thing that I have to change into. And I had all these, like, locker room body image, like, fear issue things that I didn't want to be around other people. Also because I would probably, I feared for my life I was going to be staring and get caught. True story. So, yeah, I mean, like, and we had to learn to wrestle. And I was like, I lived in constant fear of, like, popping a boner during the wrestling, like, phys ed semester. I was like, this is mortifying.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to the point of, I actually asked if I could get excused from wrestling because I would rather be doing aerobics with the girls. Like, I was perfectly fine with jazzercise or whatever the fuck it was that they were doing, just so I didn't.
So I'll give a story on that. So for my junior and senior year of high school, I took dance class because I hated gym. So it wasn't jazzercise, but it was choreographed dance, like learning Fosse and everything. But my freshman and sophomore year, I tried out for baseball. And I actually had played baseball for 6 years prior, so I was actually interested in playing until I got onto the field. And then one student who very much had my attention decided he was going to wear very tight pinstripe pants, baseball pants. And I nearly got hit in the head 2 years in a row because I was caught staring at his body. And needless to say, I never made the team, but it was one of those times of I kind of learned what my interest was unintentionally.
Yeah. I can see that. It could be a thing. I can understand that.
Well, the second year they noticed, and I walked in the locker room and they were discussing how I was distracted by him. And so my fear of being caught suddenly hit.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
And so I suddenly didn't do any sports after that involving my high school.
Yeah. Yeah. So getting back to topic. In terms of like, the clothing items we were talking about, like things being accentuated, that individuals may augment some of what they already have in certain ways. Because you have a reference here to like stuffing a sock in briefs or using push-up bras. Which I guess I never really thought about that, but I mean,
it's how you use it is really
true.
What it is. I mean, if you want to get technical, the jock itself is a supportive device. It is going to push you out and up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to, by its nature, accentuate things as well. It's
So I will say this, because I didn't have anything to do with jockstraps when I was younger, when I became an adult, was actually probably out of college, and jocks were part of gear, so to speak, for MSM, fantasy wear, whatever. I was thoroughly confused. If you went online and you didn't know anything about them, because there was this whole cup apparatus thing, and I was like, but those aren't in the pictures. In porn fantasy or whatever, no one has a cup in the actual jockstrap. They're just wearing the jock without. I was so confused for the longest time. I was like, I wasn't understanding the practicality versus
and it depends on what your interest is too. I mean, if you're looking at the jock as, hey, I want to have that nice bulge that I want to stare at, or I want to see the jockstrap lines on the person's butt, that's totally different than I want to make sure that they don't get hit in the groin with a 95-mile-an-hour fastball.
Right. Right. So yeah, you also talk about and I hadn't necessarily thought about it, but it makes sense. Puppy hoods, fursuits, cosplay, basically.
Yeah, those are other types of gear, really. I mean, if you look back at Puppy originally, long ago, was kind of a BDSM sort of, not really punishment, but it was this is the role you're going to play as Puppy. Mm-hmm. And usually that was, you weren't doing what puppies would do now. It was a totally different thing.
Yeah, it was
over time it's changed.
Yeah, it was kind of sometimes punishment, sometimes humiliation, sometimes just the subbish, if that works. Yeah, subbish, that works. Kind of role that you would play back in the old days. Back in the old days of leather.
Well, that was one of my things about when the current trend, I guess, or thing in terms of pup play, I was aware of the other version, the other kind of I always saw it as humiliation, literally being inside of a cage, being given a bowl full of kibble, wearing a collar, being treated literally like a dog/puppy. And I was just kind of like, so then when the newer iteration or different variation came on the scene, I was kind of like, okay. Like it took a while for me to be able to understand where it was coming from, like, and that it is distinctly different. It doesn't have the same kind of moments or
sort of
dynamic.
Yeah,
well, the
it
thing
can, but
is
it can't.
yeah, there was a period in between where folks who reveled in being that puppy who was being forced out of the bowl, etc., they then became the alpha puppy for others, and they shared their experience, and it started changing over time as each group would share it further and further. And so it was no longer a negative to have it. It was a positive.
Yeah.
And that's where that's where gear is coming into as well, because you go back to the 70s, if you'd walked into a bar with a wrestling singlet, you probably would have gotten a lot of weird looks.
Yeah.
Now you can go to Mr. S and buy a singlet and walk around.
Yeah.
And it's considered perfectly normal.
Yeah, and I think a lot of I like to use evolution because it's kind of the way gear has changed, over time. Like, everyone knows the traditional leather uniform with the shirt with the collar and the short sleeves, and the pants that are tight to the body, and boots and whatever. Everyone kind of knows that. But over time, as I want to say, gear and interest and whatnot have kind of gotten into the leather community, people are changing it up somewhat in some ways. I've seen leather shorts. I've seen kilts, leather kilts, things like that. Those are part of the things that have kind of changed as people have gotten a lot more comfortable and more understanding that not everyone wants to fit into that cookie cutter or can fit into that cookie cutter leather uniform mode. Not everyone wants to wear that. And it's been very interesting for me, someone who has been watching it over the years, seeing how the options for uniform and leather have adapted and changed and added to, not just, create and accentuate and but also show off the person, the individual, as opposed to the collective. So what I like to use, you can go to a leather contest and sometimes you'll kind of see the same thing over and over and over again. But a lot of other contests and such have changed and adapted with the times. And you're not seeing the same person, well, not the same person, but the same uniform. You're seeing some are wearing sleeveless uniforms, some are wearing kilts, some are wearing what they feel comfortable in. And while it may all potentially be leather, it could also potentially be other fabrics and other, choices, because that's what they want to wear.
Well, and if you'd like to, a good example of that is leather itself. You go back to the origination of a lot of these leather clubs. The leather wasn't full uniform. It was, you wore chaps and a blue jeans because you were a motorcycle club. So it was a functional thing. And then as time passed, it became, hey, that's what you're going to wear to the bar because you're showing off and accentuating things. And then the uniform side kind of kicked in and went, oh, well, we can do a full uniform in leather. Now that's the new thing. And then you had the rock bands of the 80s who decided they were going to go on stage and wear leather because that was the naughty punk thing at the time. And now it's slowly getting more and more common where you can now talk to people in general public who will say the phrase assless chaps and not blink because everyone knows what that means, even though most of us just roll our eyes because it's redundant.
Yeah.
But the fact that you can say chaps and everyone knows what that means.
I would like to see ass-full chaps.
That's pants, dear. That's pants.
Well, okay. No. Here's my question. If only the front area is cut out and not the back, then what is that called?
Technically, they're just pants. Kind of like the singlets that have the cutout in the back but are covering the front. Those are still singlets. But yeah, it's just to show the evolution of how the thing, how that simple thing, we all have seen it changing over time.
Right.
And I think we're going to see the same thing with, so like, for example, now I can wear a football jersey anywhere. Nobody blinks because that's considered acceptable to society.
Right.
But if I don't think I can wander around society in a wrestling singlet. They'd probably look a little odd at me.
Well, on the outside.
Oh yeah, no.
Like I understand what you're saying. I think like some people do subtly wear things like as an undergarment or not as direct skin contact necessarily, like underwear, but they wear it, but then they have other layers or whatever. And that's a common thing that I see that people wear, you know, mostly jock straps, you know, different things underneath their clothes because it gives them comfort. But I know that some people wear singlets, you know, when they're out and about.
Yeah.
But I agree with
also,
you.
Yeah, I mean, just think about even in like the bear run community. 20 years ago, if you had a pool party, there weren't that many people that were going to wear a Speedo. Now it's become very common. Part of that is because we've considered that acceptable, and hey, we get a benefit out of it if we're watching or wearing, and it's kind of evolved in time.
Well, and you know, also within the community, there's been a significant focus on positivity.
Yes.
So yes, there was a long time that like within the community, you wouldn't have worn a Speedo. You probably also would have worn a T-shirt when you get into a body of water, just because you were so self-conscious about your image and how you appeared that, you know, you would have practically worn, you know, something of clothing from the neck to the ankle if you could get away with it. And that's really kind of modified. And I've seen that significantly, that, you know, people are now more comfortable within a certain environment that's accepting or welcoming or affirming that you can, you know, wear something different. And I think that that's a big thing that you see at events and activities, like going to leather events. You see most of the time I see a wide variety of individuals in different gear or attire. And, you know, what I appreciate most about it is probably that people compliment each other.
Yes.
On the way something fits, the way that it looks, or even if it's just that you can tell the other person is living a better, fuller like example of themselves in that moment just by the comfort that they have.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of so the suggestion I had about like fursuits. That's a good example of that. Of folks wear the fursuit because it allows them, for some people, to have a different personality. They can express parts of themselves that they don't normally do because it's not them that's doing it.
Right.
It's their character.
Yeah.
So with the sports gear, for example, it's the same thing. Of if you put on a baseball uniform, you are now a baseball player, and you can be that person, and society just accepts it.
Right.
And that's kind of where I was like going with you couldn't wear the wrestling singlet in public because it's not something that you can generally share with other people very easily.
Right.
Well, I mean, society is becoming more and more tolerant, I guess. I guess is the way to, I don't want to say accepting. Like, if it doesn't push too many buttons or cross certain lines, people are okay with it. So, like, I think if I was to go to the store and I see someone walking around in a wrestling singlet, unless somebody really gawks, you know what I mean, and stops and stares or actually approaches the person, I don't think it would make that big of a scene. Do you know what I mean?
Well, as long as that person has their confidence and they are that, they're matter of fact about it.
Right. And I say that because most individuals in America have some awareness of what a wrestling singlet is. They may not like recognize or be able to label it, but if they've ever seen the Olympics, if they went to school with a sports phys ed program, it's not a completely foreign concept. Where like I think your point was earlier, Tony, is like a fursuit, however, is something completely different. And if it doesn't look like a mascot, attire, that even moves it further. Because I think like when the layperson sees like a furry convention, so like to the south of me in Pittsburgh, PA, there's a big one that typically happens every year, and because I'm close to there and I have so many friends in the Pittsburgh area, like the first couple of years, like even my friends were kind of like, oh, it's a furry convention, like, and they were kind of, I think, uncomfortable. But then the more they saw that they would do the parade and be supportive and stuff, like you can see distinctions and difference, because I think to the layperson, most individuals dressed like that kind of look like a mascot. But then if you're paying attention, like, oh, there's actually some differences, like in how the fursuit is put together and like what it's representing.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, a good example is Samantha Bee recently had a story on furries and the politics of it. And it wasn't done as a silly piece. It was done as a legitimate, hey, they're tolerant. The rest of our society should be too. And it was very cool to see that that's in a national, well, not really TV show. I guess TBS is cable
it's
show.
a national network.
Yeah.
You have to have
so I mean,
OTT.
And like Colbert many times referred to bears as.
Well, and I think what it comes down to is about familiarity. Like celebrities endorsing, talking about, recognizing, giving space for things that are considered less popular, or known, is, I think, just about awareness, like the affiliation of their staff, of their crew, how like romantic comedy, television show will make a reference to Grindr, which the MSM community kind of takes ownership of, because, I think there's, whether or not they created it specifically, it's it's an our thing, like we use that. So when you see that stuff kind of make it quote unquote into mainstream, then I think there's more awareness, which kind of leads to tolerance in a way.
Well, that's why I suggested the cosplay as a good example, because for a long time cosplay was, oh, those are the weirdos who want to dress up as Final Fantasy, and now it's those are the cool people that are dressing up as Final Fantasy.
Well, and it goes to whole other levels, like kind of as a sidebar. Like, so there's a pub in England, at least I think it's a pub, and there was a cute video. I don't know if I shared it on Facebook or not, but someone is a stormtrooper cosplayer, and during like the stay-at-home order during this pandemic, they actually went out and dressed in their stormtrooper attire and just kind of patrolled back and forth at the end of their driveway. And it was so cool to see, only because like that's a type of like cosplay that could be very intimidating, because there is no recognizable feature of the person inside. Like it's a complete coverage kind of thing. And they're just standing there with their blaster, prop gun, just walking back and forth, patrolling, looking like they're like officially on the lookout for something. And it was cool because people were driving past and honking their horn, and he would wave. Like it was just like, it was very surreal, but I was like, well, that's fun. But I agree with you. Like there was a time where that would have been,
that's weird.
Right. And now people kind of don't really think that much about it because, well, granted, it comes from a huge global franchise, but
Well, I mean, Disney has been very supportive for the cosplay community for Star Wars, so.
Right.
But I think that's just a layover from not Lucasfilm not being owned by Disney, but.
Well, I mean, the 501st is internationally known as, this great charity organizational grouping. And I think that's what makes the difference is you go from being on the fringes to, I don't want to say being mainstream, but like there's more familiarity to that. Kind of feel like, like you were saying, Tony, in terms of like, fetish gear with leather, rubber, uniform, sports gear, like there's duality sort of in some areas, but some of it, is specific. Like I was thinking about, like you were talking about rubber and that kind of stuff. Just look at like American Horror Story. So in the very first season in Murder House, there's and I don't know what the actual name is, but like my thing that comes to mind is like the GIMP attire.
Yeah.
and how it's a character, and then it comes back years later in Apocalypse. And like, to those of us that are acquainted, familiar with BDSM kink, like, I think there's a part of us that's like, meh, like, seen it before, doesn't really, like, you know, doesn't stand out like it does to people who are not familiar with it, where other people are like, what is that? Like, you know.
But you also have, I was going to say, that also shows representation, though.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that to some people they're kind of like, you know, that's weird, odd, like whatever, you know, what is the other people are just kind of like, it's okay, and it could have been better made, and
yeah,
could have fit better, you know.
Well, and so your example of the 501st is a good example of you can get into it with little gear, you can get into it with not exacting standards, but there's definitely a drive in that community to get more and more exact and make it more and more fictionally correct. I mean,
right,
fitting the universe. And there's just an example of other people trying to help along other new people.
Right. Well, and I think you have an important distinction in the notes about how gear is not necessarily fetish and vice versa. Like, that gear exists for some people purely as that and not as the fetish part of it. Like, your point is, like, a football player won't necessarily see their uniform as arousing, and to them, therefore, it isn't fetish gear. But then to other people, like, that's all that it represents, you know, for them.
Yeah. And likewise, the football player might use it because someone else likes it. They don't have an attraction to it, but they know that this other person that they want to play with will really enjoy seeing them in it. So they don't get the satisfaction, but they get the result of that satisfaction for someone else.
That kind of falls in a lot of the kind of role play sometimes dynamics as well. It's like getting into that fantasy setting and that fantasy scene is, you might not necessarily be as big into like the football gear or the singlets or the what have you, but if like your partner is and you're wanting to kind of play that role or play that scene, it helps. Now, and you see it a lot in, well, I'll use porn as the perfect example. Like, I highly doubt that guy in that ill-fitting like leather harness and whatnot, that they throw him into a dungeon scene. Like, maybe they're probably not really into this, but like, here you go, like, let's throw it on, and then it immediately kind of comes off in certain aspects because it's not really what they're into. The men in suits.
Yeah. Well, that was the example I'd asked Gary about earlier, was if, even though you might not be interested in the singlet, walking in and seeing another group who is in it might get your interest. But if you knew that, hey, you could actually get their attention if you wore the singlet, even though it doesn't do anything for you, you might get into that gear for that reason.
For that reason only.
Right. And I see your distinction because for me personally, given my, like, how I'm grown up in my life, I'm not one to, very rarely do I wear anything to draw attention to myself. So that concept, like, of being in that role to like be something for somebody else doesn't really come to mind very often. So like, I'm usually that's what I mean by, like, I figured out that I'm a voyeur. Like, I'm much more about observation, like, and like the titillation of seeing other people in, you know, something that they're wearing. But I understand what you mean, because like, I think back to like Tumblr and now with Twitter, kind of being the main platforms for like self-expression. I know that there's a whole grouping of individuals that like wear things because their audience appreciates it, but to them, like, it doesn't have the same meaning. It's like, yeah, I'll wear a jockstrap or I'll wear a sports jersey or a singlet or, you know, any of a list of items. You know, some people will wear things that are purchased for them. You know, like they,
I was about to get into that.
Like, it's a fantasy wish list, but it's not their fantasy.
Yeah.
It's other people's fantasy.
Yeah.
And part of that is
for me,
also,
and I'll put it on for you. Buy this for me, and I'll put it on for you.
Yeah, and I've also, like, for example, gone to leather events, etc., with sports gear, because somebody may not be interested in themselves, but they're willing to try it just to see, hey, is this something that might be of interest? And
I
so there
remember
have been,
that.
yeah, there have been many times where I've run into folks who suddenly find a whole new fetish that they didn't think about because once they tried it on and they realized, hey, these football pads fit really good and it feels really nice, and I feel more macho or
sexy or what have
yeah,
you, or,
whatever.
or you know, something. Yeah, makes me feel good.
Yeah,
Right.
To kind of,
and
yeah.
so suddenly
'Cause
now
I've
there's a
had
new
that-
interest.
Yeah, like we've all had you know, I'll just put it like that. Like the bigger guys like me and whatnot. Like we see the guys in the leather and the uniform, and I like it. I like the way it looks. It's gonna take a lot money to like get something that looks that good on me personally. So I have been like, as much as I like the idea and the concept of it, I don't think I'm gonna drop that coinage just to have that look, because it doesn't necessarily bring that out in me. But I enjoy watching and seeing other people, like, and those that can wear it, and when it looks good and it's so like right for their body or expresses their personal, you know, feelings and stuff, I'm usually all for it. I've seen I was actually in AB. A friend of ours, he found a really fun shirt that was pink, like a pink like leather shirt. I think it was sleeveless even, and you wouldn't like. It's like, oh, you know, oh, it looks really good on you, but he liked it because it was pink. He didn't necessarily care that it like when he put it on, like he looked really fucking good in it, like really, really, really good in it, like but like he just like, oh, it looks really cute. I like the color, I like what it looks, and it expresses his, you know, personality. So yay.
Yeah. And I would say definitely be open to things like that, because a lot of times you'll find something new that you never would have considered. I've had friends, had one who was very much into hockey gear, absolutely loved only that sort of sports gear. He didn't really have any interest in anything else. I can't fit into hockey gear if I wanted to, because they just don't make it in my size. So instead, we substituted and did football gear. Well, now he's got a whole new fetish that he'd never considered. And it grows like that, of you learn things that you never considered before.
Right.
So just be open to it.
And I think one of the distinctions that you make is about, you know, whether or not it's like norm for the person versus like fetish. So, you know, like you kind of make a reference to, like, you know, if it's their lifestyle or basically if it's their occupation, they may not think of it as something that's all that titillating or kind of consider that. I mean, like for a couple of years, there was kind of that campaign about like the UPS driver, you know, in the summer running around in like brown short shorts and, you know, a rolled up sleeve, you know, button down shirt kind of a thing. To them, it's a functional outfit. Like it's their uniform. They're busy working. You know, I'm sure that there are people out there that have a fetish for like postal worker pants. You know,
I'll admit it. I also have the yes.
Sure.
Anyway.
Well, I mean, there's something to be said for like the pants. Like, I don't know if they still do this or not. Like, but I think they have the tuxedo stripe down the side.
Yes.
And then I know that, at least I thought, like during the winter there was like a wool version that was made,
Probably.
or was available. But yeah, I mean, there's just like, now to be fair, a lot of postal workers walk a lot, so that probably helps develop their glutes and their, you know, their leg muscles. So that's a thing. But yeah. So
Yeah.
continuing on. So for those that don't know, we actually have a document we're trying to follow an outline, but we're doing a lot of divergence.
I wrote it a month ago, and
That's okay. So you said in regards to, as for kinds, there's leather, rubber, uniform, sports gear are kind of considered the most common stuff. Leather, most people think of in the BDSM scene. I find it interesting you say that most people see it as fetish light.
well, so we now a lot of times see the leather as it is a fetish, but at the same time, it's not the fetish. So in other words, BDSM isn't reliant on leather. They're not tied together anymore. So it is, but given the right crowd, it could be.
Right.
Especially if you're dealing with a older guard type crowd where you will wear this type of leather and that says that you are this in the social structure. That sort of a thing. It depends on what crowd you're in. Now, if you're walking around at the bar, it may not mean anything. It could be that they got leather because it looks cool, because they saw it on Def Leppard wearing it in the 80s.
For different strokes for different folks, kind of thing. Yes. For a lot of ways. You know, some folks, like, it's been... So as a baby gay and leather person, I like as a baby gay burgeoning on leather, you know, lifestyles, there were so many things that you heard that gave you pause. Like, for a long time, I bought this harness at like the Serpent, and it was a really fun looking harness. I really liked it, and I thought it was cute, and it was my kind of dipping my toe into the leather kink community at that time. And almost like a month or so later, I'm out at the bar wearing the harness, and a friend of me goes, "Oh, you should never wear that because you're not a bottom. Like, harnesses were meant for bottoms to be worn, as because harnesses are meant to be held. So while you're fucking a guy, like the top is fucking the guy, they grab onto the harness." And yeah,
for those that can't see my face, I'm having a moment, like I'm processing this. Like, I understand how the harness can be used as a piece of equipment, quote unquote, like in the moment, but like that's never how I've viewed it. Like, I've always seen it as like sort of more of a representation of like self-confidence and masculinity. And if anything, I always think of it more as like the dom like would wear the harness because they're exuding this like authority kind of thing, like through being how they're, this is way too deep, like how they are bound in leather and metal and yet still in control. So
And what's weird is like, for example, when I got into the scene, it was the exact opposite. Bottoms were the ones who wore harnesses. If you were a top, you wore a vest. That was your difference.
Oh,
yeah. That's what I was.
Yep. And
what I was
changed.
Welcome to the history of BDSM.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
Well, and it's just gear. How this changed things, because, like, for example, the bulldog harnesses started coming out because that was a top-looking harness. Because it exuded a bit more of power versus the functionality of the other one. It's evolved.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But that was the thing. Like, and I stopped wearing it for a while because I was like, oh shit, like I don't want people to perceive that at all. That didn't last very long because I, started seeing it on a lot of people and like noticing like that it looked good on people. And the whole point of it to me, like you were saying, Gary, is that it's kind of a confidence thing. So I can wear, and I also got over the whole like you can only wear certain things because of certain things. Like, no, fuck that shit. Like, if I want to wear it, I'm going to wear it.
But that's a transition within the MSM like groupings, because like in Pittsburgh there was a leather bar that was also like had been the bear community, like the local group's home bar for quite a while, and the basement level was the bear or the leather area, and there was this whole dress code thing. Like, you had to have a single piece of leather on in order to get access for years. And so like there was a little bit of mystery about it, but there was also this restrictiveness because of the dress code thing. And, a belt was not good enough. Like a simple wristband was not good enough. A leather snap cock ring was not good enough. Like, I mean, like there was just this, you had to have sort of a certain commitment. If you bought intentional square cut boots, that would be acceptable. Do you know what I mean? Like there were certain things, and I just remember thinking back, like in the earlier years when that dress code was a big deal. It was like, like denim was okay, but you had to have something with it. Like there was just this stuff, and eventually they slowly modified over the years. and that's part of that. I think you've made reference to it, Damon, about like old guard, new guard, and how there's been changes in within movements and stuff. There is something to be said for accessibility. Like I think for folks to have a connection with something, and what you can do. Like Tony, your point I think that you're making and you had put in the notes was like, where you wear something and the acceptance of it, of like whether you stand out or not, is also a distinction, like as to why you would have it and when you would wear it, like what you would do with it in that case. A long time ago, a couple that is no longer together that lived here in Erie, it was kind of this infamous story that they decided to get up in full leather and go grocery shopping for Thanksgiving in the store, and just talked about how like everyone was like, oh my God, like, and the MSM community, they were like, that was so bold. And the two of them were like, it's not a big deal. Like nobody chased us out of the store. A couple of people kind of stared, but like fire and brimstone did not rain from the heavens, like we have these concepts of like, how people will react to stuff when in reality, most people are probably too intimidated to say something.
I don't give a fuck. Like, just to be blunt. Like, I mean, seriously, like, oh, weirdos and like, or whatever, like, I got shopping to do. Like,
well, and that's one of the things is that if you have the confidence in what you're wearing and you are intent on wearing it, it doesn't matter what other people think. So if you're going to wear that harness out in public, then own it. Don't wear it and okay, maybe the first time somebody says something, I'm going to not wear it. You own it and keep going, and nobody will give you grief because you have a reason for it.
Right. I mean, I think of like one of the bullet points you have is like about rubber and how it kind of comes from leather in a way. Like a lot of people associate rubber or latex with kink specifically because it isn't so much mainstream. But then again, I see entertainers and it being used in fashion. So I think like it's becoming less and less like, ooh, yes, in the most recent RuPaul's Drag Race, like Ru came out in this vinyl, kind of latex, quote unquote, dominatrix look. And I think that's what most people think of when it comes to like rubber or rubber akin materials. But the reality is, that's a piece of fashion, but easily, modify it slightly and it can be worn anywhere without, being.
And if you want an example, I was going to say, if you want an example of like that type of rubber, that vinyl rubber, look at the mini skirt craze of the 90s. It was big into let's do rubber looking, even if it isn't rubber, we're just going to make it that super shiny effect. And that was a very hot thing at the time.
Right.
It's just kind of is moving in. Go back and watch Grease. I mean, how many of them are wandering around in skin tight leather and
Yeah.
Stud.
the cat suit, whatever you want to call it.
Chills, they're multiplying.
I will say,
I mentioned the musical.
For that movie, Olivia Newton-John's pants are amazing. Like, I'm not interested, like, sexually, but I was like, damn, that was well done.
So one of the things I'll propose here, and this is kind of into the gear realm, but sort of not, the mention of old guard, new guard. I want to say there's actually a third one that's happening now. It's the whatever. I don't know. I don't have a title for it, but there's actually another group that is you do you. And what I'll compare that to is the 60s with we're going to accept what everybody else is. We're not going to dwell on the differences. We're going to accept you as you are. And you look at the generation before that, they were very much, we have to fit this role of the perfect house with the white picket fence. And then before that was the folks who had just come out of the war and must have order and everything else. And you're kind of seeing the same effect, just in a different area.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and I think that there is something to be said for what each thing of gear represents. So like we'll talk about uniforms now. You know, as you point out, like in the notes, like it usually involves some type of power exchange. Like there's a dynamic at play on who's wearing what and what their role is, or in the perception, I guess is really the way.
Well, and the desire. So like even if you're wearing some sort of gear for someone else, there is still a power exchange there. You're wearing it for them, so clearly your motivation is because of them. So it's even though you might mutually both be interested in, like, let's say you're both interested in baseball gear of some sort, there may be no power exchange on that, but it's still the uniform allows that expression to come out, etc.
Right.
And most of our concepts of it are like coach, student, or two teammates on the same team who are wrestling for top, or
right,
go run another 20 laps because of military. There's usually some sort of exchange there.
Right. Well, and you bring up an interesting point. Like in some examples I hadn't quite considered, like uniforms can have a bit of a range. Like, so example, like school uniforms, a common like fantasy kind of kink or gear like representation people think of as a schoolgirl uniform. But there's also, you know, obviously like the community dominance uniforms, like those of being a police officer, someone of authority, you know, could be military, you know, uniform in that case. But then also, you surprised me, and I hadn't considered it, like garbage collector to like hazmat attire.
Oh yeah. I actually know a few people who are deeply into the kind of gunge, where they like getting into the messes, and so for them, trash collecting is a really hot thing. And hazmat kind of falls into the same thing. But it may not be that they're interested in those jobs. They may not be interested in people that are in those jobs. They just like the situation.
Right.
Like having like an idea of being like, for a guns person would probably be like having a person in the trash collector uniform with bags of like trash or whatever and just like tossing it on them and whatever. Like that would be their like, thing.
Or they have the pair of waders that they're wandering around in the swamp and have to step through the mud constantly.
Yep.
So you have some interesting notes here about social acceptability that are really towards the end are really relevant. So like the example you give is like wearing a police uniform in public is not really socially acceptable anymore. Pre 9/11, you could easily, you said, buy replica badges, uniforms, pieces, create your own look or whatever.
And actually, I can give an example on that. So I was collecting and creating a full police uniform. It was taking me a while to do it. And then I had finally found a place that could sell me both a St. Louis City and a St. Louis County police badge. And I was saving up to get it. That was August of 2001.
Oh.
1 month later, there was no chance of me buying it again. So we as a society changed our view of that's not acceptable anymore.
Yeah. A lot of things have gone that way, and it becomes it's just because, well, we know part of it. There were a lot of people that took advantage of the situation, and for not so pleasant, not so, you know, like wonderful means. You know, some were using it as a reason to take drastic actions against certain peoples. And I understand. I mean, and it's been a thing. Like there's a lot of even like military stuff that is a little bit harder to get now, just because of what happened in this country.
Yeah, right. Like it's really hard to get a flak jacket now, whereas you could have gotten it before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like you had said, like military uniforms may not raise eyebrows in some places. Like if you're near a military base or have like a very active like local guard, National Guard presence, something of that sort. Like if you have field practice locations, things of that nature, like people might, you know, pay much attention to it. But yeah, like some things are more difficult to obtain. and like there, and I agree with you. Like society has modified, and there's a social acceptability.
So
like I want to go ahead.
With the example of like the military base, if you're wearing camo, nobody's going to blink. But if you decide to wear a Air Force officer uniform next to a base and you have medals on it, you better be able to explain that, because you will get called out.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. Like there's a social perception of authority when a person wears a uniform naturally, and like I'm jumping down to your note about like not wearing a hazmat suit in public ever. A fetish event is one thing.
Although,
but
nowadays might not be
right.
People might look, but
that's just it. We're in COVID-19 pandemic, so like now wearing a hazmat suit on public transportation isn't probably that outstanding.
I mean,
gas
you
mask,
might get
y'all.
looks, but
Gas mask.
nobody's probably going to complain.
Gas mask.
To be fair, I wrote that before all of this.
I know. It's an excellent representation of how people have modified. Like,
yeah,
there's been stories in social media and in the press about like not talking to people that come to your door that are wearing, like a lab coat and an official badge and stuff. And like, because they're scamming individuals, they're going home to home and saying that they have a COVID-19 test. And it's like, no Department of Health, no hospital, no medical practice. Nobody's doing that. Absolutely not.
Well, and that's actually, I'm in the hacker space. So we do penetration testing, that sort of thing. And one of the things is social engineering. You want the best way to get into an office building? Carry a set of flowers and have on a name tag from a florist. They'll be more than happy to let you in the front door so that you can go drop that off at the person's desk.
Sorry, I'm still stuck on penetration testing because I'm a pervert, obviously very young-minded.
No, that's the thing. Like,
it's a different kind of test.
Yeah.
Yeah, but as a self-professed bottom, I like my focus on it right now. Anyways. Sorry. Yeah, no, I mean, like, you do have an interesting point about that people kind of don't question things in a way. Like, and I've paid attention to it, especially since I got my new job. Like, I have to, technically I'm supposed to wear my badge at all times when I'm on property. Like, it gives you security access and stuff. But I just tend to wear it all the time because I don't want to fuss around with remembering I have it. So I usually wear it like on a pocket, a lanyard, on a belt loop, something, and it's just always there. But since and I've kind of done that with most of my jobs, I've had to have an ID badge for access. But now, and I don't know why it's been like since the beginning of this year with this new job, I've paid attention to how many people have badges, and a lot of jobs do. So I think like there's a misnomer, like there's a false sense of security or trust that anybody who has a picture badge, quote unquote, has some officialness to them.
Yeah.
In that capacity.
I have a badge that I use for work to get into a building, and literally I don't think I ever really look at anyone else's badge, but like I keep it connected to me because it's how I get into the building. Once I'm in the building, like I don't really pay attention to my badge until I need to leave for the day. I could technically take it off and be fine. They say wear it at all times while you're in the building, but I know a lot of people that throw them in their purses. I know some of the women that I work with, they just put it on their purse because all you really need it for is to just get into the building. So you just, and then you go through. So,
yeah, it's one of my
with badges. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it's one of my pet peeves. Like at my previous job, granted it's it's telecom, but still, like it would drive me crazy that people would like take their badge off, and they would, just not have it on them, and they'd be like, "Can you let me in?" or blah blah blah, because they need to get back into like certain part of the building, and I'm like, "Where's your badge?" And they're like, "Oh, I left it on my desk." I'm like, well, that's not doing anything any good.
See, this is why I recommend lanyards for badges, because they're just hanging on your neck. They're just always there. You never forget it because it's always on you. No, none
I
of that
have
clipping
mine.
it to your belt or your pocket or something.
Right.
I love clipping mine to my belt because I will always know it's there. And yeah, go ahead, Tony.
I was going to say, related to that, so one of the things that you can do is, if you want to see if your coworkers are actually paying attention, take your badge out of the lanyard, but just leave the lanyard there, or your clip to your belt. Put anything in there, driver's license, parking card key, something, so that it blocks it, so people think that it's rotated. Nobody will ever ask you because you have something there. So hey, it's okay. I mean, when was the last time somebody grabbed your ID and actually looked at it? Never happens.
Mm-hmm.
However, at one point I worked
right
for the
there.
DoD. It did happen. If you had people that would walk up and grab your badge and look at you and then walk on, because it was very much a, you must have your ID to be here. If you don't match your badge, you're clearly not supposed to be here.
Well, I mean, and that's kind of one of the things that I pay attention to because I'm working now for, local a government entity. Everyone that's an employee of the county has the exact same type of issued badge. Like, it has a distinctive look and a format to it. And so you don't need to get close to read it. I mean, you should, but there's a trust in, like, they can only be made like at a specific location. I would draw more attention if you couldn't get access. Like, so if you came into a building and your badge didn't work, but it looked correct, that's, I think, when people would, I trust and hope that people would then question it. Do you know what I mean? Because if you don't know that person and they're like, well, my badge doesn't work, I'd be like, okay, well, let's talk about that. Like, I wouldn't let them in. I'd be like, what's the dealio?
The way to get around that is walk in with 10 pizzas in your hand. And so somebody else has to get the door. They just do a quick glance and see, oh, you have a badge. Here, I'll open the door for you.
Yeah.
That's where I was kind of going at with, like, if you wear the right gear in the right spot, you won't get noticed, but you might get attention if you wear it in the wrong spot. I wore a camo one time on a flight home and had actually somebody who was in the military make a comment about how he knew that I wasn't in the military, but that I also was not presenting myself as being that.
Right.
And he made a comment, wasn't a negative one, was just a kind of like making me aware that it had caught his attention.
Was he hot?
No, I was retired. I mean, older, not really. Just.
I mean, you've not knocked him off my list yet.
Well, I just asked because I'm because immediately I was like, well, that could be fun, Yeah.
Just
saying.
I will say, as you kind of go through some of these other things, about social acceptability, it's kind of very interesting as I'm reading through it. Just being, honestly, just be careful and be respectful. The thing I like the most is the one about, like, not wearing the uniform of where you're at. So like police uniform, whatever. Like, if you live in Cincinnati, don't wear the Cincinnati police uniform. Like, that's a big no-no. Yeah. That's one of the big.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I like the example I think I gave was I was working to get that St. Louis City police uniform, but I've never intended to wear it here because that's impersonating an officer, because I'd have the badge and in theory I would have the badge, but I have the patches and everything that matches this area. So yeah, that would get me in a lot of trouble. However, if I went to a leather bar in Chicago, St. Louis doesn't have any jurisdiction there, so it's less likely to get attention. However, having said that, walking to and from the bar, I would probably have a jacket on and have it zipped up fully just so that I'm not getting attention.
Yeah. You'd have to be, like, that's the thing. My partner actually does a fantasy role play. He's done a couple of classes, and he talks about, the first is just like the general, like, fantasy role play, like, aspects of it, but then he goes into talking about, like, maintaining gear and such to kind of make the fantasy more real. And those are things that he brings up, respecting the place you're at. You wouldn't walk into a medical office wearing a a doctor's uniform. You could potentially maybe get by with like scrubs, but you'd have to be really careful. Like you wouldn't want someone, again, maybe IDs and what have you, to kind of make it the experience more real for you wouldn't necessarily take that into a hospital. I mean, unless you know a kinky fucker that's in the hospital and that's their big thing, Right. But like you would hope like some kind of cover up, something to kind of keep it out of general public view until you got to your scene to kind of do everything, Yeah.
Well, and along with that, I would also suggest that you have, even if you're not going into an area that's that unique, I think I listed my fun Costco experiences. I'll explain that here in a second, but just have a backstory, know what you're doing, and so that you can explain it if you do get asked.
Mm-hmm.
So, like the Costco example I gave was, I enjoy doing baseball uniforms in public during the season, so basically May-ish until about August. I have no problem wearing them in public. Most people don't question it. Occasionally you'll get some folks who will question it, and you just have to be able to answer whatever question they come up with. So I had two different situations, both happened at Costco. One was a guy and his girlfriend. They were giggling at me from across the way. And so finally the guy worked up the courage to come over and ask me the question of like, why do all the ball players have to wear such huge cups? Amusingly, at the time, I wasn't wearing one. And so I reached down, grabbed myself, and said, not all of us do. He turned bright red. She's broke out laughing, and they left.
Ha ha!
The next time, the next time was for college, fraternity type. They close friends, but they didn't look like they were a relationship type of thing. And had one of them decide to be all macho and question like, why do the baseball players have to wear a cup? And so I knocked mine and I said, yeah, because I don't want to get nailed by a 95-mile-an-hour foul tip. And his three friends like leaned over in pain at just thinking about it.
Right.
And he just stayed silent and they moved on.
Right. Well, because sometimes people don't see the logic of a thing or understand it or comprehend it until it's pointed out to them. And
or
it's
they're
not
trying to catch you in a situation.
True. Like, they might kind of be questioning your authenticity, I guess.
Yeah.
And what you're saying, Tony, is like to be prepared or be aware of that.
I like your note of playing your story.
Yeah.
I really like that. Just that whole idea of like, because believe it or not, folks, costume contest or Halloween costume thing doesn't always work. Like, just to kind of put it out there, like it can work certain times, but like, like it's Tuesday afternoon. Yeah. If it's Tuesday afternoon and you're walking around in your I'll use the baseball uniform kind of thing. If it's Tuesday afternoon on like in a February, it's kind of like I'm going to the costume contest. Like, I don't know if that's going to fly.
But at the same time, if you know that, hey, there's a baseball tournament happening in your town, or it's like if you do a singlet, for example, at the bar or whatever, and you know that, hey, this is during the season, you can say, oh, yeah, this community college is having a tournament today, if somebody asks you.
Yeah.
Just kind of know your situation of where you're at.
Right. And be aware of, like, I mean, in a way, it's about optics. Like, to be aware of something. Like, a singlet is fun, but even if there was a local wrestling tournament, I would say a silver-haired, like, daddy bear might still get, like, looks because we wouldn't be expected to compete, so why are you wearing it?
Or the 70-year-old woman who's wearing the schoolgirl outfit. I mean...
Right.
Little off.
So I think what we're saying is like there's kind of a time and a place, in terms of what you're going to wear and just be prepared for, explaining it, I guess, if you get questions.
Yeah,
regarding
especially if
that.
you deviate outside of it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you bring up a good point about also having a way out, like if necessary, bring some spare clothes, have a bag. You said nothing is worse than going to a bar in a singlet, hanging out with friends, and then they go to catch a movie. That could be awkward or not, depending on, on how that is.
Yeah, I actually had that happen. Went to the bar and wore a singlet. I had a pair of shorts with me, but they were not going to do anything for above the waist.
Right.
And they all decided to go out to the after bar diner to go have food afterwards.
Right.
And I really wanted to go, but I ducked out because there was no other option at that point. So
Yeah.
You didn't happen to have just a spare, Hawaiian shirt hanging in the back of the car or whatever to
no.
throw us?
No.
But from there on out, I did. In fact, I learned to. You keep the trick bag in the trunk of the car, so.
See, that's like
Here
just
we
like
go.
and believe it or not, just like a t-shirt or something can do a lot, to cover something else. I've always had I used to have difficulties wearing my kilt out in public. Just as a perfect example, like it would be, I would want to change into something else because that's just not, and I wouldn't say appropriate, but you know what I mean. Like that's where my mind would go.
Right.
Not so much
if you
now,
need a
but
t-shirt,
in the beginning.
if you need a t-shirt, it's a great place to find that.
Oh my God.
Well, one habit I got into after learning a bad experience at work is to always keep a pair of dress pants at work or in your car for work. Because all it takes is one time of you ripping the seam when you're freeballing. Yeah.
Speaking of fantasies. Anyways. That being said, I think we're good to wrap up for at least this part.
Yeah.
Don't worry, people. Tony will be back. We've got more to talk about on this, but I think we've talked long enough about this. I think we're at an hour and a half, maybe something like that.
Oh, gosh.
Anyways, that's the end of this episode. Play ways to contact us. You can pop over to our website, cubzoutloud.com. Choose an email at cubzoutloud@gmail.com. Leave us a voicemail, sexy or otherwise, at 361-CBLE-TALK. That's 361-265-8255. Also, in future episodes, I'm going to double check my audio again. You can find us on various social media outlets on Instagram, Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, and YouTube at Cubs Out Loud in the appropriate place of the URL. And you can join our entourage chat up with many different people in there. It's at tinyurl.com/telegram-col. If you would like to see when we have these shows planned, if we have them planned, you can go to tinyurl.com/calendar-col and see them there. You can get, if you need a spare t-shirt, we got plenty at zazzle.com/cubsoutloud. You can get things such as this original logo of Cubs Out Loud shirt. So like last week's thing with our little flashback to 12 years ago, man. And again, zazzle.com/cubsoutloud. And again, I do want to reiterate the fact that it is international. So if you scroll down to the bottom, you can change your localization. And I believe they ship locally there. So it's a lot cheaper in shipping, but same merchandise. Zazzle.co.uk/cubsoutloud has the same thing as zazzle.com/cubsoutloud, just different company or a different region. And you see these prices in your area. So you don't have to worry about trying to figure out what that conversion cost is.
You too can get a sloppy bottom 23 shirt in Canada. Yeah.
I don't have to be the only one. Just saying.
If you would like to support us on a monthly basis, you can do that at Patreon at patreon.com/cubsoutloud. We're revamped everything, and we've got some rewards there, which I'm not sure if we have any coming up yet. Also, if you want to just do a one-time donation, paypal.me/CubsOutLoud, or you can go to CubsOutLoud.com. There's a donate link there, which basically takes you to the same place. You can rate us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe to us through Google Play Podcasts, and also find us on Spotify. Find me anywhere on the internet. It says Box Tech Box Puppy Box Cub Box something or other.
If you wish to get in gear with me, you can find me as Theater Cup 79 on most bear-related sites, or as pup_umber on Twitter.
If you would like to get in touch with me online, you can pretty much find me anywhere as Gabber73. If you're more interested in things closer to the topic of today's show, on Twitter, you can find me as Gabber73XXX. Tony, how would people get in touch with you if they have questions or queries or interests?
On most of the various social medias, I'm on as Cubziz. But again, if you want related to this, I actually have discussions of gear type stuff over on my old Tumblr account, of all things. So tumblr.com/Cubziz.
And that's Cubziz for those of you.
Yes, thank you.
Not sure what the spelling is.
And with that, say good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Have a good one, y'all.